Hello and welcome to the Kick Sugar Summit, the world's first summit on the topic of sugar, sugar addiction, and sugar addiction recovery. We know that if we're going to reverse our rising rates of chronic disease, we need to reduce or eliminate our consumption of sugar and refined carbohydrates. We are here to help you do that. There are a lot of speakers on our summit and a lot of information. Don't get overwhelmed. Catch who you can and just let the rest go. Alternatively, you could purchase one of our Summit VIP packages, which comes with an awesome ebook summarizing the core insights of each speaker, a year's worth of resources from our world of experts, and access to a whole year of weekly drop-in live Q&As with me, Florence, your host. Thank you for being here. I hope you love the summit, and I hope it changes your life.
All right. Well, welcome to the 9th annual Kick Sugar Summit, guys. My name is Molly Painschab, and I'm your host today with the amazing Angela Foster. Now, this is my first time meeting her, but from what I've read and what I understand, I'm hoping and knowing that I'm going to have a really great conversation today. So Angela is an award-winning nutritionist, health and performance coach, speaker, and host of the High Performance Health podcast. A former corporate lawyer turned industry leader in biohacking and health optimization for women, Angela's been featured in various media, including HuffPost, Runner's World, the Health Optimization Summit, Brain Tap, the Women's Biohacking Conference, Livestrong, and Natural Health Magazine. The High Performance Health Podcast is a top-rated global podcast with listeners in over 120 countries. Recently featured as number 4 in the 50 best UK health podcasts to follow in 2023, each week, Angela brings you a new insight, biohack, or high-performance habit to help you unlock optimal health, longevity, and higher performance. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you very much, Molly. It's lovely to be here with you today.
Yes, I'm so excited. So because I always like to know, especially when I've never met somebody before, can you kind of fill us in on what is your personal and professional journey? How did you get to where you are today, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
Yeah, of course. It was kind of like an unusual route, I guess, because I spent many years practicing as a corporate lawyer and doing kind of big mergers and acquisitions and flotations of company. And then I kind of got into football deals here in the UK of buying and selling football clubs. And, it was a very fun career, hugely demanding in terms of workload. And I think, the all nights that I was pulling off and the weekend work, over a series of years, I think probably set the stage for what was going to come with my health. Because when I then fell pregnant with my first child, I made partner when I was 8 months pregnant. So it was a pretty full-on year, going for partnership and pregnancy at the same time. I'd recently had surgery on the back of hormonal problems with PCOS and endometriosis. So that was kind of my first foray into health and realizing that I needed to spend a bit of time, controlling things like my blood glucose, which is linked with PCOS. So very apt for this summit when we're talking about sugar. And then I went on to have 3 children within the space of 4.5 years. And I suffered terribly with postnatal depression, which I wasn't expecting. And, I'd kind of had a complete burnout where I was hospitalized with double pneumonia. And that was a really defining moment in my life where I decided I needed to get mentally, physically, and spiritually fit and well to be there for my children. So that was a turning point when I then, decided to retrain. Initially, it was actually, I guess you could say, a selfish motivation in terms of not 100% selfish, but more, how can I be really healthy for my kids? I'd struggled with my mental health and I wanted to make sure that I was going to be present in their lives and there for them. So I went on that journey, and then I kind of was, I wasn't working at that time. So I had the luxury of focusing on health, whereas previously I'd really focused on career. And I was like, there's got to be a way of bringing these two worlds together. And that's when the concept of high performance health was born, when I realized that health is the foundation, right? It's like the tectonic plate that every other goal sits on. And so it's kind of just grown from there, really.
It's amazing. As a person who has PCOS myself, it's always, it's always nice to know that there are people who have gone before me and they've found a way. And so I'm excited to hear more about that as we continue to talk today, because you're right. When we can't be there for ourselves, then we certainly can't be there for our children, our loved ones, anybody for that matter. So One thing that I really noticed in doing a bit of research in preparation for my interview with you is, I noticed that you really value data and bio-individuality. So what role, since we're on the Kick Sugar Summit, what role can sugar play in having optimal physical, mental, spiritual, high performance life? Does it have a role? Should we not be consuming sugar in order to have those things? Can you talk to us a bit about that?
I think the thing with sugar is it's very dopamine fueling, right? There's evidence that shows it's as addictive, if not more than cocaine. And I think that when we look at sugar, it can give you that kick and you may feel like you've got heightened concentration, but then it kind of leads to a low afterwards. And I think people's relationship with sugar is really what needs to be looked at more, is like understanding what's driving that behavior, because we all know that controlling our blood glucose is healthy. You and I both have PCOS. It's intricately woven with our ability to manage our blood glucose. And certainly I have seen dramatic changes both myself and with clients in terms of those hormonal issues when you bring that under control. But often with sugar, there is an emotional component that needs to be addressed. There's an energetic component. Some people are really pushing the envelope really hard, like I was as a lawyer, and they rely on sugar and caffeine and things like that as a pick-me-up. And so I think before anyone can kind of really successfully give up, what I've found, or even not necessarily completely eradicate sugar, because let's face it, it's nice to be able to go out with friends and enjoy a dessert occasionally and things like that. I'm not saying that we should, completely remove it, but I think that as it's what we do every day that makes the most difference to our health and our lives in terms of that compounding effect. And in order to kick sugar effectively, we need to address what relationship we have with sugar in the first place.
Right, which really plays into that idea of bio-individuality, right? So like some people, if I'm understanding you correctly, some people may need to be as low sugar or no sugar as possible. Like I think about, people who maybe are consuming sugar in the form of like some sort of complex carbohydrate, whatever, right? Like maybe they're following some sort of Mediterranean diet, whatever. But then there are people who maybe tolerate it a bit more. And so they're eating simple carbs or whatever. Like I think about like the guys in the gym that are like really bulking up or whatever, like their muscles, and maybe they can consume more sugar because they've got a place to put it, where somebody who maybe has blood glucose issues doesn't really. So we have to really be mindful of what works for us and what doesn't.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, I think, your ability, I guess you could say really what you're saying there is almost like you earn your sugar, right? So if you've done a workout, and we know that if you have recently done some strength training or some high intensity activity, then we're not actually utilizing insulin so much as a mechanism for moving that sugar into, or that glucose into cells. There's another, one called GLUT4, for example, that can be activated. So that's in the absence of insulin. And really insulin, we don't want to keep spiking insulin because over time that can lead to insulin resistance. So if, people who are watching this summit and listening, they wanted to cycle their carbohydrate intake or have any kind of faster burning carbs, doing it post-workout is a good time to do it because you're facilitating or utilizing that mechanism. And so you're less likely to see high blood glucose levels or really much spike in insulin if it's post-workout. That's not necessarily a license to say, oh, go and eat as much chocolate as you like post-workout. That's not what I'm saying. But certainly, faster burning carbs actually can sometimes help support your system to fuel more muscle growth. And I think muscle mass is a key thing that we need to look at. Those are the sink, if you like, that we can deposit glucose into in its long-term storage form, which is glycogen. And so if we have decent muscle mass, we're going to manage our glucose better. And so part of that is understanding that as we get older, particularly for women going through their 40s and into menopause, we become a bit more insulin resistant. And that's coupled often with high cortisol and higher levels of inflammation. So there's this perfect kind of, I don't want to call it a storm, but it is a form of metabolic storm or chaos that's occurring, that if we put the right things in place, we can take control of that so much better. If we're younger than that and we have something like a high carb sensitivity genetically, or it could be our microbiome, our gut microbes we know are also playing a part. If we have something like PCOS, those kind of things, we need to work a little bit harder at managing our blood glucose. And for women like yourself and myself who have PCOS, that's a lifelong condition. It's a metabolic disorder at its core. It's not a hormonal issue. And so understanding that that's going to be playing a part in your life as you transition through menopause on the other side, it's just not impacting the hormones in quite the same way in terms of the sex hormones, but it's still there. Then we need to make a commitment to ourselves to eat healthily and in a way that's designed for our bodies.
Absolutely. So that really brings me to my next question. How can we use nutrition to manage our blood sugar? There are the diet wars out there, people, keto, Mediterranean, carnivore, vegan, paleo, pescatarian, like, how do we make sense of this? And I noticed that you use something called Viome. Can that help us figure out like what's right for us or how we can use nutrition to better manage our blood sugar?
Yeah, I mean, I think Viome are a great GI test that you can use. I think there's also other tests, for example, like Zoe, which is in the US and the UK, are doing some great work where they're actually combining looking at the microbiome and doing stool testing alongside looking at blood lipids, alongside using a CGM. So a continuous blood glucose monitor, and actually getting you to kind of stress test different foods and see how your body's reacting. I think we are making massive progression in our ability now to actually help people manage this so much better. And obviously we've touched on the emotional component, which we can come back to because that's separate from this, because you might intelligently know what you must do. You may have looked at your genetics. You may have done something like the Zoe test. Are you going to then carry it through and have that discipline? We can look at how we might make that work in a moment. But I think that testing can definitely be a part of that. I think that eating foods in a certain way is also very powerful. We know that if we look at Jessie and Shalsbay's work and the research she's done, the glucose goddess, around how do we see blood sugar spikes, and does eating, changing the order of what we're eating, change things? And it seems to from her research. So we see that if we're eating fibrous foods first, so vegetables or salads, and it doesn't have to be that you section up your plate and you go, right, I'll eat the fiber first or the veggies, and then I'll eat the protein, and then I'll eat the fats. I mean, it's a pretty, most people aren't going to want and enjoy it, and it's quite an antisocial way to eat. But just having a few mouthfuls, that seems to then create a fibrous mesh in the small intestine, which slows down the release of glucose. Coupling it with protein increases satiety and reduces that further. I think by completely cutting out carbs and doing things like keto, if you're removing carbohydrates, you're going to have less insulin sensitivity, and that's been shown, right? Most people need to cycle in and out of ketosis. So if you keep restricting and going super low carbs, the moment you start eating carbs, you're going to see your blood glucose spike. That's not to say that will be always the case, because over time you can train that back. I think there's a healthy balance. I'm definitely not an advocate of going on any extreme diet. To me, whether you're going on a ketogenic diet, which I think can be helpful in retraining the system for some people, or there might be a reason like epilepsy, for example, that has been shown to be beneficial. I think for the most part, when we embrace something that's extreme, we're really just going on another form of elimination diet, because we're just eliminating foods. And I'm much more an advocate of, let's look after those gut microbes. Let's have diversity. Let's have a predominantly plant-based diet with healthy amounts of protein and good quality fats.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that emotional piece then. Like you said, like it's one thing to have this information and know the things that we need to do, but it's quite another in order to actually follow through and be consistent, especially long term. Again, when we're thinking about some sort of metabolic disease that is lifelong, how do we do that? Have you figured out how to help people just stick with it?
I think, it's different for everyone, because I think really you've got to look at your relationship with sugar and what's driving it, right? Because food is very emotional. That's the thing. It's a very emotional thing. We don't just eat for health. I think we would have far less problems if we did. We also have hyperpalatable foods, right, which are very moreish and very difficult to actually realize when we're full. We may have taken on a lot of calories and not feel that full. Once you combine sugar with fat, it becomes almost impossible to resist in any format. And you could think of that on any level. It doesn't matter if I gave you a piece of sourdough on its own, it's not going to be that delicious. But if I now slightly gently warm it and put some nice melted butter on top or some smashed avocado, now it becomes really, really tasty. And that's a kind of quote unquote quasi healthy way of combining carbohydrates and fats. If we have some sweet potato with a sprinkling of like mineral salt and butter, it tastes so much better. So they're much harder to resist than when they're sort of on their own. And I think this is a thing that people find. And, we could look at a whole set of processed foods where actually I've interviewed people on my podcast, neuroscientists who have worked in the past for companies that bring people in just to see how addictive certain cookies and things can be. And it's tested on children to see what is the most hyperpalatable. And then that's what hits our shelves. So it's really, really difficult. And so I think the first thing for people to recognize is if you have, you're struggling with sugar, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. What you can do is when you've recognized there's an issue is look at, well, how can I address that? And one of the things to look at, as I've said, is your relationship with it, but what's driving that behavior? So is there a certain time of day? So many people, for example, will report the fact that they're fine all day. And then for some reason in the evening, they can't resist it. They might be watching TV. And they just can't resist it. They find themselves halfway down a tub of ice cream, or they're sitting with some chocolate or a packet of biscuits. And it's a case of bringing curiosity rather than blame and thinking, okay, what's driving that behavior? What's going on? What am I missing in my life that I'm finding that sugar? And there's multiple reasons for that. For some people, it could be that simply they're missing some kind of love and connection, and they're missing that oxytocin. And they're not getting that kind of dopamine hit and, and coupled with oxytocin and things like that. And so they're looking for that in food. So then it's about addressing relationships to a degree. And that isn't always easy if someone's lonely, for example, but it's starting to get help and seek outside and friendships and things to help with that. For other people, it can be that they just go at it all day. They're so busy, particularly mums. They're, juggling multiple things, the kids, the school runs. They've kind of got a whole day in itself. If you think in the morning, getting the kids ready and getting them to school, then the afternoon, picking them up and running them to clubs. And I know this because I have 3 kids, so I know what it's like. You could add that up to about 6 or 7 hours. That's a day in itself in addition to your working day, right? There's no time that you're giving necessarily to yourself. And then you feel like you can't sit down because there's a whole list of jobs calling for your attention, like laundry and things like that in the evening. So you don't feel able to just take that time and curl up with a nice book, or even, if you want to watch TV or whatever it is for you, you don't feel able to. Well, guess what? If we give you some carbs, it's just the same as kind of drinking wine, which also contains sugar. This is going to now slow the system down, that from a neurological perspective, you feel more able to sit on the sofa, and your body's using that because physiologically you need to stop and relax, but you're not giving yourself permission. And so this can actually be a way of you doing that. So I think understanding what's driving that relationship for you is probably the first start in creating change and looking at it from a curiosity perspective, not a blame. How would you coach a friend through this situation? You'd help them find out what's going on.
Absolutely. Because I think so many of us don't even fully comprehend that whole cycle of, we're stressed to the max. So our cortisol is up, and that's a hormone, and insulin is a hormone, and insulin will respond to cortisol, or blood sugar. I apologize. Blood sugar will respond to cortisol, right? Because we're like, run from the saber-toothed tiger or whatever is happening, right? Like our body thinks that we're constantly in fight or flight or whatever mode. So blood sugar has to go up, insulin has to come in, and then we can have these crashes, right? And so then we're almost like seeking those high energy dense foods, things like the Snickers or the whatever, right? Like we think about these commercials, like you're not yourself when you're hungry, right? And we're eating those things and we're setting it all off all over again. So like stress, emotions, all of those things, I think, just like you've said, it's really important to remember there are drivers to these cycles that we get ourselves caught up in. And when we can throw the wrench in, when we can figure out what's going on, we can start to begin to do something different. Curl up with the book. Exercise. I want to talk a bit about exercise, because I know, like we had briefly mentioned, it is a way that we can help manage our blood sugar. Not that it's a free for all if we are working out, but that it is a tool that can help us to better process what's going on. And so I'm wondering, when you said, especially if we're 40 or older, and I know we start to lose muscle mass, and I know Dr. Gabrielle Lyon has talked about not being worried so much about being over fat, but under muscled. Can you kind of talk to us about like what types of exercises would be the most effective in helping us to manage our blood sugar? Does all exercise fall into that category, or is there anything specific we should be looking at?
I think increasing your overall movement is like number one for anyone listening, right? The first thing you want to do is just to increase your overall movement. When we look at the way calories are burned by the body and the way that's apportioned, we have what's known as our basal metabolic rate. And our basal metabolic rate is the energy that we need. If you and I would just sit on the sofa all day long, we'd still require a certain amount of calories coming in to support that and to look after all our organs and our systems. The next then biggest, so that accounts for most of it. But then the next biggest expenditure is through what's known as NEAT. People immediately jump to exercise, which is the EAT part. That's exercise active thermogenesis. And so they think that if I've been to the gym in the morning, I'm going to be good for the day. And it doesn't matter that I'm sitting all day. Not true, sadly. But actually, this is a good thing because NEAT is powerful. Exercise can account, unless you are some kind of ultra endurance athlete, for about 10% of this total calorie expenditure. But NEAT has the power for about 20% on top. And this is overall movement during the day. And so we want to be burning what we're consuming as a fuel, right? Ideally, we want to be moving into more of a kind of fat burn. And that's why things like the ketogenic diet are touted. But overall, we want to be managing our calories so that we're not becoming overweight or obese, right? We want to get that balance right, that we're consuming in accordance with what our needs are. And NEAT is the first thing. So like getting outside, going for walks, parking the car farther away, every single time that you need to do something that's sort of energetic, you can bring more energy to it. All right. So this is called VILPA, or vigorous intermittent lifestyle kind of form of exercise. And so it's like you could do it with more vigor. You could walk more quickly to where you were going. You could run up those stairs. This is going to burn more things. And it's going to help you in terms of like maintaining a better weight for you, which is really, really important. When we look at like then specific types of exercise that we want to dial in on top, having more muscle mass is also going to make that bottom of the pyramid that we were talking about, the basal metabolic rate, faster, because muscle is much heavier to cool and carry. It burns around 2 or 3 times the amount of calories as fat, but also it is that sink, that metabolic sink for glucose. And so it's really, really important that if you want to have good insulin sensitivity, you are looking after your muscle mass. And this is where Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, her work's phenomenal in terms of we are under-muscled. It's an organ of longevity, and we really need to pay attention to it. And this is a combination of being strong, so lifting heavy things, and that becomes even more important as we move through peri and post-menopause, because we lose estrogen as a stimulus for muscle mass. But also we do want to do some exercise on top of that. So that would be low repetition heavy weights. And then we want to couple that with some that are in that more kind of classic 10 to 12 rep range to build a little bit of size. I mean, you get hypertrophy at all, even within strength sets, you get it at all rep ranges, you just get more there. And that helps to increase muscle size, which is important for glucose tolerance. High intensity interval training has also been really proven powerfully to help us improve our ability to have better insulin sensitivity. So that's really important as well. So is zone 2. Really, you want to be able to have your spectrum of activity across all ranges. So I would say that the key thing, in addition to strength training, is to create some polarity around your training. So you're walking where it's a brisk walk, you can talk but not sing. You're in that kind of upper end of zone 2. It's great for longevity. It's great for mitochondrial health. And ultimately, it's our mitochondria that dictate how good we are at utilizing carbohydrates and fats for fuel. So we want to look after those. The other thing as well, when it comes to exercise, is then to look at the top end. As long as you have medical sign off and you're good in that regard to go, you want to be pushing yourself really high, because those high intensities have been shown to improve insulin sensitivity, but also powerfully help support your mitochondria. And that will help with your energy as well. So I think exercise is a really fundamental part of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just thinking about the mental and emotional wellness that comes with just moving our bodies as well, not just when we think about, better blood sugar management, but I mean, that does play into it, right? Because we know the foods that we eat definitely impact our mood. So then thinking about movement and how it increases BDNF in the brain, and, just there's just so much good benefit when it comes to moving our body. So absolutely. I thank you for your suggestions. I'm also wondering then about, because supplements are so huge when we think about, blood sugar management, when we think about health, it's everywhere. And I'm just wondering, what can you tell us about using supplements and how they might help us with managing blood sugar or even getting off of sugar?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Some of the supplements that help you manage blood glucose, I think, are really, really powerful. Like berberine has some really good science behind it. That's kind of considered to be nature's metformin. I think also having chromium actually we lose quite a bit through sweat. So if you're exercising a lot as well, that can be important. It helps with glucose tolerance, but it also helps to minimize food cravings. So I think that's important because, yes, there's the emotional component that we've spoken about, but there's also a physiological component. Things like bitter melon extract, really helpful. Apple cider vinegar pre a meal, or even like we were talking about having some fibrous veggies, having a salad, maybe dressing it in an olive oil and apple cider vinegar dressing, things like that can help to improve glucose tolerance. Ceylon cinnamon is helpful. A lot of people think, oh, that's great, I'm adding cinnamon into my smoothie, but you're probably adding cassis cinnamon and not Ceylon cinnamon. It's Ceylon cinnamon that has the benefits in terms of helping you regulate your blood glucose. So just making sure you're getting that right. But I think those compounds can help. I think that from my perspective, it's always important to dial in the lifestyle stuff first, right? To get your nutrition on point and to really embrace the physical fitness. I think it's been said by so many experts, if exercise was a pill, we would all be taking it. It is probably the biggest lever we have to pull in terms of our longevity and our health, but also it's the domino that when you, as you were saying, when you're exercising, you're more likely to eat better. So it has this domino effect. When we're exercising, we're more likely to make healthy food choices because we see ourselves as healthier. We see ourselves as more of that kind of athlete mentality. We also sleep better. We produce more adenosine when we're exercising. That ATP is part of the generation of energy. We increase that when we're exercising. And so now that helps to create more sleep pressure. We sleep better. In turn, we're going to have better habits the next day because sleep really interferes with insulin sensitivity. It also interferes with some hormones that regulate appetite and satiety. So ghrelin is a hunger hormone. There's some literature that shows we see a 20% increase in ghrelin when people are underslept, and we see a 15% reduction in leptin. And leptin tells you that you're full. So if you're now tired and you're seeking out those hyperpalatable foods, you're going to feel hungrier and you're going to feel less satiated as well.
That brings up such a good point. Can we talk a bit about how we can improve our sleep? And does it have anything to do with circadian rhythms? And are there things that we can do to get those, like if they're out of whack, how can we get them back on track?
Yeah, for sure. So we have sleep is fundamental to everything. And I think that it's really the foundation of health and high performance. And I think with circadian alignment, we're all on a spectrum somewhere of being either an early morning person, an intermediate, or a night owl, right? And we seem to be somewhere along that spectrum. So I think that understanding more about your chronotype is helpful. But what we want to do is to really optimize with the rise and fall of the sun as much as we can. Now, that is going to be very difficult here in the UK in November when there is only light between 8 and 4 p.m. We're not all going to go to bed at 4 p.m. Do you know what I mean? And we're not necessarily not going to get up till 8 a.m. There wouldn't really be enough time in our day, but we're looking really at that equatorial kind of 6 till 6 regimen. And so when we look at that, we know that light really affects our cells if we're exposed to blue light between the hours of 10 p.m. and 4 a.m. So if we can protect those hours from blue light exposure, dim the lighting at home, put on blue light blocking glasses before bed, that helps with circadian alignment. And there's some evidence on how it also impacts things like blood sugar control and insulin sensitivity. Getting outside first thing in the morning for even just 5 minutes and seeing the sun is really, really important for regulating circadian rhythm. When you're coming to bedtime, having that wind down routine and also keeping your evening meal away from bedtime. Because if we're digesting food, we're not really kind of repairing ourselves and settling into that really deep regenerative sleep. And what I see with many clients is that their resting pulse is not coming down until, late into that sleep. And that's indicative that there's some stress or strain going on. The other thing to mention here is there is an interaction between insulin and melatonin. So we've been talking quite a bit about insulin and how it helps to regulate blood glucose. Melatonin helps us to fall asleep and stay asleep, but it's also a powerful antioxidant hormone. Now, as melatonin starts to rise, we become less insulin sensitive. So if we're having a lot of carbohydrates in the evening, that can be sticking around in our blood glucose for longer during the night than we would want it to. So actually eating away from bedtime to optimize for the interaction between those two hormones is really important as well.
Is there like a like kind of a window we should shoot for? Like, are we talking like 3 hours before bed, 90 minutes before bed? How
That's a
long?
great question. I would say generally 3 hours is ideal. For some people who are working late, who are running kids around to clubs and things, it might not be possible. But if you can aim for 2 hours as a minimum, that's much better. I think if you haven't been exercising and you are having it very close to bed, then there's an argument that actually having some protein with some healthy fats and like fibrous carbohydrates may be better. Although there is evidence that having carbohydrates, as in starchy carbohydrates, can help sleep. So we know that when we have starchy carbohydrates and we have them in combination with protein, it helps that tryptophan move across the blood-brain barrier, and that gets converted with the right cofactors into serotonin, which gets converted to melatonin. So it actually can help with sleep. But I think just making sure that you're being moderate with the amount of carbohydrates and you're trying to keep them away from bedtime is probably the best practice.
Yeah, I would say that working with clients, I've found something similar, just in that if they're, under those 20 grams, like if they're trying to be keto or carnivore, their sleep starts to become shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And then once they start introducing some of those carbohydrates back in, even if it's just a bit later in the day, they're finding that their sleep is better. They're less hungry during the day. They have more energy, all of that. And so that
For
really lines
sure.
up with what
And
you're
I think
saying.
rather than trying to like really reduce your carbohydrates, why not look at how can I improve my sensitivity to carbohydrates, like we were talking about through exercise, because everyone should really be able to tolerate 100 to 150 grams of carbohydrates a day. So if you're not, it's kind of like asking question, why not? Because particularly if you're exercising a lot, carbohydrates help to communicate safety to the adrenal glands and things like that. So I think, and women in the luteal phase need a bit more carbs than maybe in the follicular phase and things like that. So rather than thinking, how can I keep taking carbs out, which is more likely to make you crave sugar? It's more about thinking, what are the lifestyle behaviors that I can put in so I have greater metabolic flexibility, I can enjoy food more, and I can protect my health and longevity?
That's such a great question. Because then I think about things like, if we're consuming other substances, like if we're smoking cigarettes or we're consuming alcohol, does that play a role at all, do you know, in our sensitivity to sugar or our ability to process it where it's not impacting us negatively?
Does what, drinking alcohol or smoking cigarettes?
Yeah. Does any of
Yeah.
that ever play a role in that? Do you know?
I think with smoking, it can lead to an appetite suppression, which is why when people stop smoking, they find it really difficult. I think with alcohol, it opens up appetite. Alcohol itself often is in combination with sugar. So there's a fair amount of sugar in wine, for example. If you're having a spirit, usually you're not just downing spirits, you're having it with some kind of mixer that contains sugar. But I think also alcohol itself tends to open up appetite. And so we're more likely to make decisions that we wouldn't make if we weren't drinking.
Right. And I find the same when clients are using cannabis and other things as well, right? That it lowers those inhibitions, it increases hunger, whatever, we get the munchies, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then, yeah. And so those are definitely lifestyle changes that we can take a look at that would also aid in better managing our blood sugar.
For
So I
sure.
kind of want to switch gears just a little bit. I'm wondering how we can talk about sugar and our immune system, because flu season is upon us. We're hearing all these stories about how there's new variants of COVID. Does sugar impact our ability to fight off the numerous viruses that we face in our day-to-day life?
Mm. Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we see in the literature is that actually after consuming sugar, it lowers immunity immediately afterwards. So if you really want to have a healthy and robust immune system, sleep is going to be key, and keeping sugar to a minimum is also going to be key. A lot of the immune system is contained within the gut. When we're having lots of sugar, we're feeding microbes that we don't necessarily want to be feeding. We want to be embracing a more kind of diverse, colorful diet. So if your sugar's kind of coming from colorful fruits like blueberries and figs and things like that have a really deep pigment, and red grapes, then what we see is they're really high in polyphenols, and those polyphenols actually feed our healthy gut bacteria. So we're supporting them, and you're still getting that sweet taste, but the fruit is wrapped up with fiber as well, so it moderates the release. If people really want to kind of get technical about it and they're wearing things like continuous glucose monitors, they can see what their individual sensitivity is. So I think one of the top foods for spiking people's glucose is bananas, even though they're not actually that high on the glycemic index. But the way we've grown bananas look very different now than they did originally. But everyone has individual things. Some people will find that if they eat an apple, they're going to see a spike. And other people don't. And apples contain pectin, which actually delays the stomach emptying. So for some people, they don't really see anything. For others, maybe you combine it with a little bit of healthy fats just to help that further. So you're getting all the vitamins that can support your immune system from the fruit, but maybe you're having apple with, for example, some almond butter, or maybe you're having some carrot sticks with some hummus or something like that, just to help really. Or you're having blueberries on some yogurt or some chia pudding, something like that.
So really thinking about how we're getting the sugar, right? Because like you said, it breaks down, there's fiber, it helps mitigate that like sugar spike. The fiber helps feed the gut, the polyphenols help feed the gut, all of these things. And so then that can boost our immune system or at least protect us. It doesn't have that same kind of, I don't know, I think about, this time of year and all the kids are going to school and they're exposed to everything and they're eating 4 times a day and they're having these sugary snacks in school, and I just wonder how much that contributes to the constant spread of these viruses. And is there other things that we can do, like you said, lifestyle changes we can make that would make our immune systems a little more robust?
Yeah. And I think educating children, right, on sugar and just helping them to understand and not rewarding things with sugar. I think it's a little bit like alcohol. We always reward. It doesn't matter if it's a birthday or any kind of celebration or someone's down or we need to comfort them. Like, it's like, let's have a drink. It's a very similar thing with sugar. Hey, you did well. Let's go get some ice cream. You're creating that neural pathway in the child. So if we can not reward, because what happens is, that I've worked with clients before who have real problems resisting sugar. And it's because essentially in their childhood, whenever they felt a bit down, their mum was like, let's have a biscuit. Let's do this. I'll make a cup of tea or something. Let's have a biscuit. Let's have some cake. And so they see comfort in that sugar. And I'm not putting any blames on anyone, right? At all. It's just, if that is you that you're doing it, have a look at maybe you can moderate that behavior for your child. If you're someone who actually was on the receiving end of that behavior as a child, maybe you can now bring curiosity to the situation and think, oh, I understand now, like emotionally, I'm being driven to do that. What could I replace that with? Could I go out for a walk and come back? Or could I have a healthier form of natural plant-based fruit sugars that would provide me with some fat, with a bit of protein that really gives me that satiety I'm looking for, some dark chocolate even, and you'll start to redefine your taste. You'll start to recondition it to expect less sweet stuff.
Yeah, and it doesn't take long. I think it's something like 10 days or something on average. Yeah,
it doesn't take long
to change. So is there anything that I haven't asked you today that you can think of that might make it easier or harder when we're talking to anybody who might be watching to better stabilize their sugar? I know we talked about like combining foods in a specific way, if that's helpful, exercise, maybe watching if we're consuming other substances. What else? Circadian rhythms and sleep, supplements. Is there anything you can think of that maybe we missed when we're thinking about stabilizing our blood sugar?
I think the only last thing would be stress. So I think we live in a highly stressed world. And I think that particularly the female audience watching this will always feel that they need to be doing more. I think as mums, we're always, looking after everyone else. And I think just starting to understand your nervous system. I do a lot of work with my own clients where we monitor things like their heart rate, their HRV, to really understand how sympathetically driven they are, how much recovery they're getting, so they can show up as their best selves. We kind of do that in combination with looking at their female physiology, their life stage, their goals. It's a kind of process known as biosyncing that we've created. And I think when you become in sync with your goals and dreams, with your values, and you're really living in alignment with that, with your most empowered future self, and you're syncing your physiology with your biorhythms, your sleep, your circadian rhythm, your infradian rhythm, if you have a menstrual cycle, when you start to bring everything in sync and things really line up, you have less stress. You want to address stress. Stress isn't bad, but you want to address it so that you have the right recovery protocols, whether that is a few minutes of breath work, whether it's taking a walk outside after something, giving yourself that space to kind of breathe almost, doing some breath work would be amazing as well. All of these things can in turn help to reinforce the healthy behaviors that we want to be embracing, as opposed to just letting ourselves kind of run ragged, overcommitting ourselves, and then we find those cravings and things coming back. So I think the stress piece is another important part.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. We put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And in today's world where everything is so go, 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 and instant gratification, and we're multitasking like crazy, right? We have to stop, take a breath, and slow it down, get into that parasympathetic state more times during a day than we have been, for sure. So tell us about the High Performance Health Podcast and the Female Biohacker Collective, if you would.
Thank you. Yeah, so the High Performance Health Podcast is my podcast where I interview top experts in the world on everything from hormones through to nutrition, metabolism, fitness, everything to do with health and high performance, how to access flow states, mindset, manifestation. We have we've been I'm very grateful to all the guests that we have, because we have some incredible experts that have come on the show. So that is really a show that I kind of dedicate my time to. We also have bite-sized episodes to help you make changes in your life. And we publish twice a week and help people really to do that. And we have a Facebook group called High Performance Health alongside that people can come in and get support in a live community as well. And then the Female Biohacker Collective is something I created. This is for women who really want to optimize their health on every level. So I talk about how do we shift into optimal health, and that's like dialing in our sleep, our hormones, the insights we're gathering, and working with our intuition alongside the way we fuel our bodies and mind, and we train both our bodies and our minds. So it's not just the physical training, it's the mental health piece. And that is basically the health coach in your pocket. I'm live in there training in the community each month. And we also have loads of masterclasses. And it was my way of giving people access to information in one place, so they didn't have to keep searching everywhere for it at a really affordable price. And that's essentially the Female Biohacker Collective.
Amazing. And can we be anywhere in the world to be a part of that program?
You can be anywhere in the world. You could just go to femalebiohacker.com and you can join, and you'll be with a wonderful community of supportive women who all have similar goals. And myself and my health coach Maura are there to support you.
Amazing. So what's next for you, Angela?
What's next for me? So what's next for me actually is I've created this program called Biosyncing, which I think I sort of touched on as we were going through. And I really have just had amazing results with the people I've worked with on it. And it really is about just syncing, as I say, it's kind of at its core, syncing with your goals, with your future self, and with your physiology to get everything to line up so that you can have true health and success and abundance. So it's really putting that concept of high performance health in practice and helping people do that in a way that is bio-optimized for them.
That sounds amazing. Just hearing you talk about it and watching your face light up as you talk about it, I'm excited for it. That's amazing. I'll be looking forward to that. So where can we find you? People are watching, they are connecting with you. They want to maybe get in touch with the Female Biohacker Collective. You said the website for that, but where's an easy go-to place for us to find you?
There's a couple of places. Angela Foster Performance is my website. So if you put angelafosterperformance.com, you'll find everything on there. The podcast, High Performance Health, is available on every single platform. You'll also find all the episodes on my website there. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, I want to dial in some of these habits and behaviors, right? So I want to really address my sleep or my hormones or any of the things we've been speaking about. The first thing to do is to get a snapshot of where you are. And we have a quiz that you can take that will help you do that. And then we will assess you in each area and send you a free personalized report with your health score, complete with recommendations on how to improve. And so if any of your viewers want to take that, it's at yourtotalhealthcheck.com, and they can go there, and it takes about 60 seconds to do. You ask you a series of questions, and then we'll send you a free personalized report.
Amazing. Okay, before you go, I always like to ask this question. If you could tell like a younger version of yourself, or if you are maybe talking to somebody who's just starting out, what might you tell them about sugar, blood sugar, health optimization? What would be kind of like your words of advice or wisdom?
My advice would be to crowd in all of the healthy foods and behaviors that you want. They will naturally crowd out the others, not to get too hung up on restriction and what I don't want to have, but to think about how can I show up as my best self today? How can I be truly healthy and honor myself by putting foods into my body that give me energy and vitality? And if you're filling your plate with those things, if you're having a little bit on the side, it's not going to be so bad, but really to honor yourself and come from a place of self-love. And if you fall off track, bring curiosity, like we've been saying, think about what is there, seek out help from things like this, from experts, as much as you can. Come and say hi in my community. And and just know that wherever you are, whatever starting point you have, you can absolutely get where you want to go if you just hold true to yourself and follow that.
Thank you so much for those kind words, those words of wisdom to leave us with. I appreciate you so much, Angela. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Molly.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed this interview. And before you go, do one more thing. Stop, think back on the interview while it's fresh in your mind, and write down your favorite takeaway in a special dedicated journal. If you do this, at the end of the summit, you'll have a page or two of nuggets of wisdom to guide you forward. And remember, this is just the beginning. At the end of the summit, you'll be invited to attend a free webinar where I will personally summarize the key insights of our speakers and pull it all together into a practical plan of action. You can also check out our Facebook page where you can connect with others and ask questions, and our Kick Sugar Coach podcast and YouTube channel for additional inspiration. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you in the next interview.